want to thank you all for coming today. And we're honored to have Christopher come all the way over from Oregon. Tell me a few things about himself. Do you know that he has been telling stories to the public since he was 13 years old? And I also wanted to let you know that since 1975, he has shared stories with thousands of children and adults at schools, libraries, churches, festivals, fairs, and theaters. And I think you all know that he has a CD, and that is, of course, available. And he's getting a pretty hefty percentage of that back to Storykeepers to support us here in Missoula. So turn on your imaginations and let's hear Christopher. Thanks for coming, Christopher.
So one time, there was a rich old lady, lived all by herself. She had lots of money, kept it right in the house up on the fireboard. Now, every evening, she'd sit there rocking back and forth in her chair by the fire, just carding wool. Her cards going, and if you know this part, you can join in. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Now she had this big old dried fish hanging up on one side of the fireplace. And this fish, it didn't have nothing but one eye. So she called it Old One Eye. And every evening, she'd sit there rocking back and forth until she yawned 3 times real big. Then she'd pick up her knife, cut her out a chunk of that fish, eat it, and go on to bed. Now, there come 3 robbers to that settlement, and they heard somebody talking about that rich old lady and how she lived all by herself, and they decided they was gonna rob her. Now, the leader of them bandits, he didn't have nothing but one eye himself, and he come up with a plan. They'd watch that old lady till she went to sleep, go inside their house and take all her money. So he sent one of the fellas up to the house to watch, and that man got over there. He found a little hole by that chimney corner, peeked in, and there was that little old lady rocking back and forth, her cards going scratch, 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 and directly she yawned real big. Oh, Lordy! Woo-hoo! That's a 1 come, 2 more come, and I'm gonna get out my knife. And she looked right over at her dried fish. Now, it so happened that big old dried fish was hanging up on the same side of the fireplace, that hole where that rogue was peeking through. So when he heard her talking about that's 1 come, 2 more come, and she's going to get out her knife, he thought she's talking about them. He ran off and he told the other ones, he goes, hey, you guys, you know what, I don't think we ought to rob her. I think she's a witch. Well, that big old one-eyed bandit, he didn't believe that man. He sent the other fella to watch. And just about the time that man got over there and peeked in, that little old lady, she yawned again. Oh, Lordy! Woo-hoo! That's 2 come, 1 more come, and I'm gonna get out my butcher knife. And she looked right at her dried fish. Well, that guy took off out there, comes back. You know what? I think George is right. We better not rob her. She's going to get us with her butcher knife, sure as the world. Well, then that big old one-eyed bandit, he had to go see for himself. So he went traipsing up to that house, stuck his big old one eye against that hole and peeked in there. And there was that little old lady rocking back and forth, her cards going, scratch, scratch, scratch. And directly she set all them cards down, and she yawned real big. Lordy! Woo-hoo! That's 3 come, and now, on one eye, I'm gonna cut me out a chunk of you. And she picked up her butcher knife and made for that dried fish. Well, that rogue, he tore out of there like his pants was on fire. Took them other 2 bandits with him, and they weren't ever seen in that settlement again. That little old lady, she cut her out a chunk of that fish, ate it, went on to bed, and she slept sound. How's everybody doing? Good. I can't tell you how honored I am to be here, what a pleasure it is to be here in this beautiful state, in this beautiful city. My name is Christopher Leebrick, and that story, well, first of all, thank you guys for coming out to experience live storytelling. Have you guys been having a good time hearing stories today?
Yeah.
Good. Well, that one you just heard me tell, that one comes from the mountains, but not these mountains. The mountains around Tennessee and Virginia and North Carolina, and it was gathered up and collected way back. Now, you young folks, you got to stretch your minds here. Way back in the 1940s. Woo! Ancient history, right? By a man who went up to those mountains and he stayed with some families for a while. Now, back then, and I don't mean this to shock the children, back then, guess what? You're supposed to say, what? No TV. Can you guys imagine? It hadn't even been invented yet. And certainly no computers, and a lot of those families, they probably couldn't afford a radio. So do you know what they would do at night? They'd all go over to each other's cabins. They'd build a fire. Maybe they'd pop some corn. They'd probably play a little music. And then they would tell stories. Really good stories. And this man, Richard Chase, he listened and he wrote down as many of those good stories as he could in 2 books, which you can still find on Amazon.com, called Grandfather Tales and Jack Tales. But I like to tell good stories from all over. This next one comes all the way from Africa. Now, would you do me a favor? Could you help me? Good. I need you guys to make a sound for me. And I know you're going to be able to do this after that last group that you heard. This sound is kind of like a drum, because a drum is a very, very important part of this story. And the sound that I want you to make is this. Good. Excellent. Okay, stop for a second. In a minute, you guys, I can tell you're going to be awesome at this. In a second, I want you to do that. I want you to keep going, make lots of noise until you hear. And then everybody stop, because the story is about to begin. Ready? Ready, that back there? Okay. Here we go. Make some noise. This is a story about a strange animal, and it's called Strange Animal. There were too many people to tell that boy what to do. There was his mother and father, his grandfather, his older brother, and there was also his aunt, who was always shouting at him, "Do this, boy! Do that!" Every day she would would shout at him and make a great noise that would frighten off all the birds. Well, the boy did not like his aunt. Sometimes he dreamed of going to a medicine man and buying a magic potion to sprinkle on her food and keep her quiet. But of course he never did that. Instead, he always obeyed her as his father said he must. "She has nothing to do but shout at you," explained the father. "I guess it keeps her happy." "Well, when I'm a big man, I'm going to go shout in her ear," said the boy, and he liked thinking about that. Well, one day, the aunt heard somebody in the village talking about a faraway place where a wonderful, delicious type of fruit trees grew. She ran to the boy and she said, "Boy, go pick me a basket of that fruit." Well, the boy had heard about that place also, and he did not want to go there. One of his friends had warned him about the strange animal that lived in the cave near the fruit trees. But the aunt insisted, so finally, the boy agreed to obey. Early the next morning, the boy set out. His heart, it was like a cold stone of fear inside him. He carried a fruit basket and a small leather drum along with him, and after many hours, he finally came to the place where the special trees grew. He set down his drum and began to quickly and quietly gather up the delicious fruit. When suddenly, there was a rustling sound coming from the brush. The boy stopped picking fruit and stood there frozen. Then out of the brush came the strange animal. It was just as his friend had described, and the boy was terrified. Quickly, he picked up his drum and began to beat it. The strange animal stopped, looked at the boy, and began to dance. All day long, the boy played that drum. And all day long, that strange animal danced. He found out, as long as he played that drum, the strange animal could not harm him. Finally, after many, many hours, darkness fell. The strange animal stopped dancing and disappeared back in the brush. The boy figured it had gone back to its cave and he was able to walk safely home. When he got to his village, however, who do you suppose was waiting? "Where is all the fruit? You naughty boy, you've eaten it all up," and she began to spank him until at last he was able to run off and hide in his own hut. Well, the next day, the boy told his father the reason he'd been unable to bring fruit back from the trees. The aunt heard him and said, "There is no strange animal at that place. You're making that up." But the father believed the boy and said that the next day they would all go together to the place where the special trees grew. "Well, there is no strange animal there. I think it's a waste of time," said the aunt. But she was never one to miss a chance of shouting, so she went along too. Well, the next day, when the family came to the place where the special trees grew, the strange animal was not in sight. The aunt began to gather up fruit and stuff it in her mouth. "Boy, come here, come here. Now you pick fruit too this time, and don't you be lazy." And she took his drum and hung it on a tree branch that was just out of the boy's reach. Well, very soon there was a rustling sound coming from the brush. The boy began to climb the tree and reach for the drum, but it was too late. Out of the brush came the strange animal. It went straight to the mother and father and quickly ate them up. The aunt tried to run away, but the strange animal chased after her and quickly ate her up as well. Well, by now the boy had reached the drum and he began to beat it. And the strange animal stopped looking for people to eat and began to dance. Well, the boy played that drum faster and faster. And the strange animal danced more and more quickly. Finally, he played so fast that the strange animal spit out the father. The boy played even faster, and the strange animal spit out the mother. Then the boy smiled and began to play much, much slower. Doo-doo, doo-doo, doo-doo. You must play fast again so the strange animal will also spit out your aunt. Do I have to? Yes, you must. And so that boy played fast until at last that strange animal spit out the ant. Well, the ant was quiet all during the journey home. The next day, she was quiet as well. In fact, she never shouted at that boy again. Being inside the stomach of the strange animal had taught her not to waste her time shouting. Now all she wanted to do was to sit quietly in the sun. And the boy was very happy. Thanks. Well, as I think you heard, I come from Oregon, and I'm curious, how many of the kids out here tonight know about the Oregon Trail? Raise your hand if you do. A few of you, that's pretty good. Well, then you guys probably know that that trail started east of here in the great state of Missouri, but you know what you may not know? That trail went on and ended 2,000 miles later at my house. Actually, my house wasn't built quite yet, but I lived about half a mile from the official end of the Oregon Trail in a place called the Willamette Valley. And I'm going to brag for just a second here, so forgive me. This valley is beautiful. On one side, you've got the Pacific Ocean and the Coast Range Mountains. On the other side, you've got the huge Cascade Mountains, and in between, in that valley, you have rain. Lots and lots of rain in that part of Oregon, only I'm not the one who brought it with me today. But I'll tell you, it makes things really green, and it makes things really grow. In fact, something you guys may not know about Oregon, in Oregon, the pumpkins, they get so big you can pick one, carve it out, and use it as a barn. It's true. I have a pumpkin barn in the back of my house. Something else you may not know about Oregon is before you cross over those mountains and get down to that green valley, you have to go through a desert. Because Oregon also has a high desert. And the desert is one of those places you either love or hate. If you love it like I do, it's the smell of sagebrush. It's the wide open spaces, the fact that there are still wild horses running around out there and very few people. But if you hate it, the desert just seems dry and barren and endless, and there's no water. But usually when I go out there, I go to a place called Christmas Valley, which is right near Fort Rock, which is right near Hole in the Ground, which is right by Crack in the Ground, which is right by the Lost Forest, which is right by the town of Wagon Tire, population 2. It's a little remote, but I like it out there. One of the most famous characters to ever come out of the Oregon desert was a man by the name of Rube Long. And Rube was a true cowboy. He lived his whole life near Fort Rock. He tamed wild horses and he raised cattle. And Rube, more than anything, became known as a storyteller. And one of the subjects Rube liked to talk about was water in the desert, or the lack of water in the desert. This is a little story about Rube I like to call The Great Flood. One time, Rube was out working on a fence post on his ranch near Fort Rock, and he looked down the dirt road. He saw a cloud of dust being kicked up. And a couple minutes later, a fancy jalopy come tearing down the road, stopped right at Rube. Man stuck his head out the window and said, "Hey, mister, come over here. Tell me, what do they call this place out here anyway?" And Rube, he kind of came a little closer and he said, "Well, sir, this place is called Fort Rock. See that big, huge rock over there shaped like a fort? Fort Rock." Man said, "Yeah, but come on, buddy. I mean, people don't actually live out here, do they?" Rube said, "Well, sir, actually they do, and I guess I'd be living proof of that." And the man, he kind of scratched his head, and he looked around, and I guess he was one of those people that all he could see was sagebrush going on for miles. And he said, "But it's so dry. There's no water. Does it ever rain here?" And Rube said, "Yes, once." "Do you recall a fella by the name of Noah? The first long-range weather forecaster? Built an ark and floated it during 40 days and nights of rain?" The man said, "Yeah, I reckon I've read something about that somewhere." Rube said, "Well, sir, now that time we got a 1/4 inch. Because I'll tell you guys, it is dry in the Oregon desert. Woo! Mighty dry." Another time, there was a man, and he was a homesteader, and he lived with his family right out there near Dead Horse Gulch. And this man's prized possession was his 12-foot well. Had just a little bit of water in the very bottom of it. And this man, he hoarded that well water like it was gold dust. He kept the lid to that well chained up, and he kept the key to that chain around his neck. In the morning, his kids would all line up, and he'd dole out a teaspoonful of water to each one of them to help them wash down their sagebrush cakes. Well, one day, guess what? That man, he made a terrible mistake. He accidentally left the lid off of his well. And that afternoon, sure enough, a little desert twister come up. And it started circling around that homestead cabin, and then, like it sensed moisture, it went straight to that well, corkscrewed all that water straight up into the dry air, and it all disappeared except one single drop. And that drop of water started falling back toward the ground. Boo! And just then, one of the kids happened to step out of that cabin and look up, and that drop of water hit him smack dab on the forehead. Surprised him so much he fainted. And you know something, those people, they had to throw 3 buckets of sand against his face to bring him back to normal. Because they're not used to water out there in the Oregon desert. Thanks. And you know, before we move on from Rube Long, it would be remiss of me not to share some of Rube's famous sayings. Because Rube, he really is kind of like the Will Rogers of the Oregon desert. In fact, he's kind of known as a sage of the sagebrush country. And a lot of the things that Rube used to say were funny, and pretty much all of them were wise. And I'd like to share a few of those with you. If you don't get it when you want it, maybe you'll want it when you get it. Sometimes city slickers used to hire me to take them out on a horse trip, and occasionally, on the first day, one of them would come up to me and say, Mr. Long, I need to tell you, I've actually never ridden a horse. And I'd always say, hey, it's okay, it's all right. Because I got a horse that's actually never been ridden. The two of you can start out together. A horse is good for a person. It helps something inside of them. The person who's been trained for many years by a horse is never quite the same after, and is better. fast horses is because out where I live, they have to graze at 30 miles an hour to get enough to eat. And finally, if you take care of your cows will take care of you. Oh, you know what? Thank you. I almost forgot his most famous one. The older I get, the better I used to be. Thanks. You guys are a great audience. Small, but great. I do have one question, though. Is there anybody out here tonight, by chance, who happens to like spooky stories? Oh, there's one. There's a few. All right, I knew it. Now, how did I know that? It must be psychic, right? And another question is, do you like the person you're sitting next to? Yeah? Good. I hope so, because this story, it does have some creepy parts in it, and it's possible that during the course of the story, that person's going to scoot a little closer to you for extra protection, so fair warning. This is a Cree Native American story. This is one of the stories off of my CD. This is called Skeleton Woman. Once, there was an old man and an old woman who were bent and white-haired with the snows of many winters. And they lived in that far north country where the winter nights are long and the snow lies deep. And one winter, the white giant came with a vengeance they had never known before. The winds howled, and the snow grew deeper and deeper, and one by one, all of the animals began moving away to the south to escape the howling wind and the endless snow. And finally, although the old man went hunting every day, soon their house was empty, and he and that old woman began to starve. Well, after 3 days with nothing to eat, they woke and saw there was just enough wood left to build one good hot fire. So the old man said, "Old woman, I know that today I will find something for us to eat, but I'm going to need that wood to build the fire to cook it. So you wait here while I go out to hunt." And out he went. Well, that old woman, she'd never been a very nice old woman to begin with. And after 3 days with nothing to eat, she wasn't in a very good mood. And she went, that old man thinks I'll stay here and freeze while he goes out to hunt. I'm gonna build me this fire. And if he wants another fire when he comes back, he can go out, get more wood, and build it himself. So she took all of the last of the wood and built it into a nice, hot, roaring fire. And she stood over it, warming her hands. But after a while, she got one of her hands a little too close to the flames, and she burned her finger. So she popped it in her mouth. She went, "Oh!" After 3 days with nothing to eat, that burnt finger tasted pretty good. So she started chewing on it. Then she stuck her whole hand in the fire and cooked it, and she ate that. And pretty soon she started gnawing on herself without even bothering to cook it until she had eaten herself all up and was nothing but a rattly old skeleton, and she was still hungry. So she went into the corner and hid, and very soon the old man came back carrying a deer across his back, and he said, "Old woman, you've built the fire. Now how do we cook this deer I caught?" But just then, a voice from the shadows called out, "That's all right, old man. I like my meat raw." And here she came out from the shadows, a rattly old bag of bones, going, "Ah!" screamed the old man, and he started running. But because he was an old man, he couldn't run very fast or very far. And all the time, right behind him, was the old skeleton woman going. Well, finally, he came to a canyon where a river ran far below, and he saw there was no way he could jump across to the other side, and he just knew that skeleton was going to eat him up. But on the edge of the cliff was a house where a little old magic woman lived. He ran to her door and he said, please come out and help me. There's a crazy old skeleton woman chasing after me." Well, the little old magic woman looked at him and said, "First, you must pick me some berries and chop me some firewood." Well, the old man knew he didn't have much time, so he picked those berries and chopped that wood just as fast as he could. And then the little old magic woman walked to the edge of the cliff, said some magic words, and fell. And her body began to stretch and grow into a bridge leading across to the other side of the canyon, and the old man was able to safely cross over. Then her body shrank back up and became normal, and just then, here came the skeleton woman going, and when it saw the old man on the other side of the canyon and the little old magic woman standing there, it said, "You get me across to that old man." But the little old magic woman said, "First, you must pick me some berries and chop me some firewood." "I don't have time to pick your berries or chop your wood. Now you get me across to that old man or I'll eat you." And so the little old magic woman went to the edge of the cliff, said her magic words, and fell. And her body began to stretch and grow into a bridge leading across. And when the old man saw that, he said, "She's helping that skeleton get over here to me," and he knew he was dead because he could not run another step. And then that skeleton woman started to cross over going, but when it reached the middle of her back, suddenly the little old magic woman called out, "Now I'm going to make my back all loose and flimsy." And she started to sway and flop her back until that skeleton lost its balance and toppled all the way down to the bottom of the cliff, where it broke into a pile of bones. That old man lived with that little old magic woman in that house by the cliff, and today, if you go to the very edge of that cliff and listen, way down below where the river runs over the rocks, you can hear a sound. And they say it's the sound of the skeleton woman trying to pull her bones back together so she can climb up the side of the cliff. And the Lord help us if she should ever succeed. Thank you. How about a funny story now? I told you guys that story has a few creepy parts. But I think it's part of what makes it a good story. The first time I heard it, I couldn't believe some of the twists and turns that story takes, and I think that can be a sign of a good story. All right, so this one is also a Native American story. This was gathered by another storyteller from Oregon. Her name is Susan Strauss. This is about a character I bet some of you know of because he's pretty famous. His name is Coyote or Coyote. And if you know about Coyote, you know he always seems to find trouble. So let's see what happens to him in this story called Coyote and the Grass People. That day, Coyote was loping along the grasslands of the Great Plains. He was feeling pretty big about himself. He had brought salmon to the Columbia River. He had killed a great monster. He was feeling so big about himself, he started bragging. It's a very good thing I've been doing. Soon, the two-leggeds will be coming. Then all at once, boop, he heard it. That song. Somebody was singing off somewhere very softly. Ooh, we are the strongest people in the world. Well, who's singing that? Thought Coyote. He scanned the horizon. Nobody. So he went on his way. Tracks, 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 tracks. Well, pretty soon he heard that song again. Ooh, we are the strongest people in the world. Who's singing that? Shouted Coyote. He scanned the other direction. Still nobody. So he stuck his nose down in the grasses and he started sniffing around. And then he heard, we're... Aha. You see? It was the grasses. They were all singing together very softly. Ooh, we are the strongest people in the world. You grasses, you guys think you're the strongest people in the world? Ha! I, Coyote, I'm the strongest one in the world, and I'm going to prove it because I am going to eat you. There, that proves I'm more powerful than you. But just then, from deep inside Coyote's stomach, he heard, "We are the strongest people in the world because we can make you fart." Oh yes, said Coyote. Well, that's nothing. Nothing for a great chief like me. And he went on his way. Tracks, tracks, tracks. Well, pretty soon there came a little one. So that's it, huh? That's your big power. That's nothing. Nothing for a great one like me. Tracks, tracks, tracks. But then there came a... And it actually lifted Coyote a little bit off the ground. Still nothing. Nothing for a great one like me. But then there came up, and it shot Coyote straight up into the air, and wham, he hit the ground. Oh, man, he said as he got up. He had bruises all over his rump and on his legs. And then there was a wham, wham, he hit the ground again. And pretty soon there was poor Coyote, wham, 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 shooting across the Great Plains. He was getting all covered with bruises. So one time when he landed, do you know what he did? He ran over to a grove of poplar trees. He wrapped one arm around one tree, one arm around another, and held on for his life. And there was poor Coyote exploding away. Oh man, and those trees started to go and come out of the ground. Well, thankfully, after a while, the whole thing stopped, and a very sore coyote went on his way. Oh, jeez. Oh, man. And today, if you look very carefully at a poplar tree, you will see. It looks as if somebody has tried to pull it out of the ground. It looks that way because Old Man Coyote was there, passing on the grass people's power. Thank you. How you guys doing? You up for one more? Yeah. Well, as I think you heard, I've been telling stories, performing as a storyteller since I was 13. See, that means for 3 years because I'm 16 now. Forever 16, right? Actually, I was thinking about this the other day. That actually means it's coming up on 30 years, which is weird for me to think about. But there's a couple stories in my repertoire that I've actually been telling since I was 13. Only I don't tell them too much anymore. It has to be a special occasion like this one. I'd like to share a folk tale. There's many versions of this all over the world, but I'd like to share the 20th century American Appalachian version of this story about a guy folks called Wicked John. So one time there was a blacksmith folks called Wicked John. Now I tell you, this blacksmith, he was mean. Never went to church on Sunday, never went to town meetings, laughed about folks being baptized and saved and such. One thing about old Wicked John, though, mean as he was, and he was mean, he always did know how to treat a stranger right. One day, he's out there blacksmithing in his shop, and he looks up, and there's an old beggar standing there in the doorway of his shop, all crippled up with rheumatism, leaning on 2 sticks, looking in at him. John says, "What are you gawking at, old man? You come on in here, rest your bones a spell." So that old beggar heaved up over the door sill and sat down on it. John, he went back to work, kind of looking at that old fella, and directly he threw down his hammer, went inside the house, and he come out with a big old plate of victuals. Big chunk of ham meat, boiled sweet potatoes, green beans, a slice of cake, and a glass of sweet milk. He said, "Here, old man, see if you can make out with these rations, if there's anything here you can still eat." Well, that old beggar thanked Wicked John and started chomping in with his toothless gums. John went back to work, kind of watching that old man and that old fella. Boy, he ate up every bite. And when he was all done, he set that plate down. He set that glass to one side. He let them 2 sticks drop. And he commenced to straightening up. Straightening up so that all the kinks come up popping out of him one by one. And when it finished, there was a big stout man standing there in the doorway looking down at Wicked John. He had a long white robe, white bushy hair, a white beard, and he was holding a silver key in his hand. While John, he done dropped his hammer and his eyes was bugging out of his head. Man says, "Well, John, I'm St. Peter, and every year, once a year, I come down to earth and I see if there's any decent folks left. The first person I come to that does me a good deed, I give him 3 wishes. And anything in the world you wish for, John, it's going to be that way." Well, Wicked John, he kind of looked up at St. Peter, like he didn't really think what he was saying was so. 3 wishes, huh, Pete? I ain't never had me 3 wishes before. I don't think I quite know what to wish for. So he started looking around, wishing on the first thing that popped into his head. I know! My rocking chair. You see this high back rocking chair here? This is my favorite chair. I love to sit and rock back and forth a spell when my day's work is done, but dang it, if it don't seem like every time I'm ready to relax, one of these loafers from across the way is sitting there ahead of me, I have to kick his butt out. Makes me mad. I wish anybody who sits in my rocking chair would have to keep on rocking till I say they can quit. That's what I wish. Well, let me see now, Peter. Wish number 2. I know. My sledgehammer. You see this hammer here? It's my best hammer. I use it every day in my work, but dang it, if it don't seem like every time I need it, one of these school kids from over here has come in here, picked it up, taken it out to the field, seen how big a rock they can bust, and let it go in the grass. I have to go hunting for it. Makes me really mad. So I wish anybody who touches my hammer would have to keep on pounding till I say they can quit. That's what I wish. Well, I'll tell you guys, St. Peter, he looked down at Wicked John like he thought he was wasting his wishes pretty bad. Like I tell you, though, this blacksmith was mean. He didn't care about nothing or no one. Well, Peter, let's see. My last wish, my third wish, I guess I better make it a good one, huh? I know. Oh, my thorn bush. I got this fire thorn bush out front of my shop, and it turns real pretty with flowers early spring of the year, and I love that thorn bush, but dang it, if it don't seem like all these folks who come in here to get their horses shoed don't back into it with their carts. Oh, and then these highfalutin folks, they come over the mountain fox hunting with their little red coats, and they think, well, I gotta have me a riding switch. So they break off a big chunk. I wish anybody who touches my thorn bush would be pulled down in the middle where all them stickers is the thickest. Ha! He looked up. St. Peter was already gone. Couldn't see which way he went or nothing. So John just went on back to work. Well, a couple days later, John and his wife, they got into a little spat. She was jawing at him. He was jawing right back at her. Made her so mad she said, "Confound you, old man. The devil take you anyhow. He sure can." John laughed at her, walked on back out to his shop. He had just started working on this horseshoe when he looked up, and there in the doorway of his shop was a little devil, about so high. His horns were just starting to pop out of his head. "Daddy said he's ready for you, old man. He sent me to come and fetch you, told me to bring you right back and not to wait for nothing, so come on, we gotta go now." John says, "Well, son, I don't know what to say. I guess I'm obliged to you coming up here to fetch me. I'll tell you what, though, you look a little tired from your journey. Why don't you come on in here, relax a spell, I'll finish this horseshoe, we'll be on our way." That little devil said, "Well, okay, old man, but just that one, we got to get back or Daddy's going to roast me good." And he went over, he climbed in that rocking chair, and he started rocking back and forth. Well, John, he finished that horseshoe, picked it up, soused it in the cooling tub, picked up another one. Little devil says, "Hey, old man, that's two. You said one. Now, come on, we got to go." And he tried to get out of that chair. But the more he tried, the faster he started rocking, till pretty soon that little devil's head was going whammity-bang, 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 gets that chair back. He was screaming and hollering for John to let him go. John said, "Woo, woo, woo. I could if I wanted to, but maybe I don't want to. You promised to get your little tail out of here and never come back." He says, "Yes, sir, please let me go." So John, he made that chair stop, and whoo, across the barn and out the door streaked that devil. Well, a couple days later, guess what? I'll tell you what. John and his wife, they was at it again. She was jawing at him. He was jawing right back at her. Made her so much she said, "Oh man, I'm serious this time. I wish that the devil would pack you up and cart you off today. I wish he would. And you know what John did? He went like this. He went, grabbed another piece of pie, walked back out to his shop. Well, he had just started working on this big old wagon tire, and he looked over, and there in the doorway of his shop was another devil. Quite a bit bigger than that first one, about high school age. Had pretty big horns. Daddy said he's ready for you, old man, and this time he sent me to fetch you, so we got to go back right now. Come on. John said, why, yes, sir, son, I can see that you are in a hurry. Tell you what, I just got to finish this wagon tire, and we'll be on our way. So John, he started pounding on that wagon tire, and the devil, he saw it was kind of awkward the way John had to hold that tire and try to pound it with one hand. So finally that devil said, listen, old man, this is going to take all day. Now you hold that tire and you let me pound it. And he went over, picked up that sledgehammer. He started pounding. Well, John, he turned it in between licks. When it was all done, he set it aside, and that devil, he tried to let go of that hammer. But the more he tried, the more it started swinging him around till his arms and legs was going every which way. And he said, hey, old man, let me out of this. And John said, whoo! I could if I wanted to. You promised to get your tail out of here and never come back. He says, please, sir, let me go. So John finally made that hammer stop, and boo, 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 off the walls and out the door went that devil. Well, about a week later came the doozy of all time. John and his wife, she was a-flapping at him. He was a-flapping right back at her. Made her so mad there was steam coming out her ears. Oh, man, I wish the pure old devil himself would come and take you away. I wish he would. John howled with laughter, dodged the chunk of firewood she threw, and spit at her. Went on back out to his shop. Well, I'll tell you guys, Wicked John, he hadn't even made his first pound when he looked up, and there in the doorway of his shop was the old boy himself, with his red body, his curly tail, his big goat horns, and his cow hoof propped up on the sill. Oh, man, I come to fetch you myself, and I ain't going to stand for none of your foolishness. So come on, old man, it's time to go. John said, why, yes, sir, yes, sir. Much obliged to you coming up here. Tell you what, I do have to finish this horseshoe. Why don't you come on in and relax? Oh, man, I ain't going to relax in no chair or yawn. Oh, that's fine. But I'll tell you, we'll be done a lot quicker if you could help me out. Why don't you, old man, I also ain't going to touch no hammer or yawn. Now, I saw what you done to my boys, and I didn't like it. So come on, old man, we're going down. And he reached in there and he pulled Wicked John out by the collar. Well, as you can bet, Wicked John didn't want to go. And they started fighting and biting and scratching and kicking. They had a couple rounds right out by the barn. Made that devil so mad, he said, confound you, old man. I'm going to lick the hide off you right now. Now, see if I don't. Now, where'll I get me a switch? And he looked. He saw that thorn bush. He grabbed hold of it, and it spun him around where all them stickers is the thickest. And he thrashed around, but the more he thrashed, the more them stickers stuck him, till pretty soon he stayed right still with his head sticking out the top. Mister? Yeah, says Wicked John, what do you want? Would you mind please maybe let me go out of this sticker bush? Well, as a matter of fact, I would. Seems like you and me got to strike up a bargain. Don't you, nor none of your boys, nor no one from down there ever come near my place again, you hear? Devil said, yes, sir, anything, sir. Just, please be letting me out of this sticker bush. So, John finally released that big devil, and he streaked out of there faster than you could say lickety-cut. Well, John lived on the rest of his days, and he wasn't ever bothered by no more devils. And finally, one day, John died. He went on the walk up to the pearly gates of heaven, got there, knocked. St. Peter, he opened the door a crack, and he said, oh, It's you, John. What do you want? Howdy, Pete. I was just, kind of hoping maybe I might stand some show of getting in up here. St. Peter says, well, John, I was looking at your record just the other day, and on the good side, you got a couple things at the top, but on the bad side, it's filled up to the very last line. I'm afraid you don't stand a chance in the world of getting in up here. And he shut the gates of heaven on Wicked John. So, Wicked John stuck his hands in his pocket, turned around, started whistling down the road to hell. Well, he was about 100 yards off from the gates of hell. One of the little devils happened to see him and said, Daddy, Daddy, look who's coming. Well, that big devil looked out and he said, bar the gates, boys, bar the gates. And they shut the gates of hell on Wicked John. And Wicked John, he gets up to the gates of hell and he looks between the bars, and there's the devil with all of his young'uns trembling behind him. You just get out of here, old man. You go on your way. We don't want your kind here. John said, well, now, wait a second. You tell me something then. Where am I supposed to go? St. Peter done barred me up from heaven. You're barring me out from hell. So you tell me something. Where am I supposed to go? Well, that big devil, he thought a second, picked up a pair of tongs, reached into the furnace, took out a big old chunk of coal, threw it over the fence and said, there, old man, you take that piece of fire somewhere and you go start a hell of your own. And they tell me, you go down to the dismal swamp sometime late at night, you'll see a little bob of light floating along. Some folks call it the jack-o'-lantern. Some folks call it the will-o'-wisp. But I reckon you and I know who it is. Thank you. Thanks for being such a great audience. And also, I really want to thank Storykeepers for bringing me out from Oregon and for being such wonderful encouragers of the art of storytelling. And I want to encourage all of you, tell stories. Tell family stories, tell folk tales, keep the oral tradition alive. And in closing, let me leave you with this. This is very short. It's very old. In fact, nobody really knows where this came from. It was adapted by Jane Yolen. And to me, this little story sort of sums up stories themselves. The fact that somehow through telling of fiction, or as they say, swapping lies, truth can still emerge. Once there was a man who seemed to have everything. He had a beautiful wife, he had great kids, he was thriving in his career, and yet something was missing. So one day he went to his wife and he said, I think I need to go out and find truth. His wife looked at him and said, well, then go out and find her. So the man put everything in his wife's name, she was adamant about that, and hit the road a beggar after truth. Well, the man searched high and low. He went up into the mountains, down in the valleys, out in the desolate places. And finally, after a long, long time, he found her. Truth was a wizened old woman with only a single tooth in her head. She lived high up in a mountain cave, and although her appearance was harsh to look at, when she spoke, her voice was soft and lyrical and pure, and it was then that the man knew he had found truth. Well, he stayed with her for a year and a day, and he learned all that he could learn, but finally it was time for him to return home, and he said, Lady Truth, you've given me so much. Please, is there anything that I can do for you? Well, the old woman thought for a long time. She tapped a finger against her tooth. And finally she said, yes, when you speak of me, tell them I'm young and beautiful. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. See ya.